This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. He's a Puerto Rican icon. He's a gadfly, a fighter, a scholar and an advocate, a guerrilla researcher with provocative personality and an unpredictable sense of humor. He's been on Colbert, and he's right here on CUNY TV. He's Angelo Falcon, founder and president of the National Institute for Latino Policy. For more than 30 years, Angelo has been advocating to improve Hispanics' political clout. He co-founded the Institute for Puerto Rican Policy and tackled the city's elites. He is chair of the U.S. Census Advisory Committee on Hispanic Populations, and he's authored and edited 4 books and written scores of chapters, reports, papers, as well as newspaper columns, and is a frequent commentator on all things Latino. Welcome, Angelo. This morning when you got up, what's really ticking you off about U.S. politics and government at the moment? You personally.
Me personally? Well, that it's so stupid.
Go, explain.
Well, you know, there's no real serious political discourse in this country on almost anything. The politics are so polarized, they're so superficial, they're so got-you oriented that you can't have any real substantive discussions about anything. And that really just drives me crazy.
Okay, as a Latino, what makes you crazy?
That the politics of this country is just stupid. It's very polarized, and you can't discuss Latino issues or anything in any serious way.
Okay, so it's a general macro phenomenon.
I think so, yeah.
We're in trouble.
Yeah, I think so.
When do we get out of trouble?
I have no idea. I mean, the situation...
How do we get out of trouble?
Well, I have no idea either.
This is good.
Basically, the problem we have is that we're in such a different situation politically in this country in a way that I don't think we've ever been in this type of situation where the media, the way that we convey ideas, convey conversations, convey policy options is very different in terms of the internet and the 24/7 news cycle, the way the kind of polarization with the kind of very radical right, and the impact it's had on the discourse or the lack of real discourse. It's something that is all very new. And one of the things that to me is perplexing is to see these pundits on these television shows acting as if it's all under control and that they actually know what the hell they're talking about as they take examples from the past and basically project into the future, when I think a lot of that stuff just goes out the window.
So we're in a new really misunderstood, not understood era of American politics, and it could be a dangerous age.
Yeah, and it's, you know, in terms of the Latino community, I think it's reflected in the sense that there's a tremendous transitions going on within the Latino community that I don't have easy answers to. You know, people, as you said, sometimes I'm on these programs and people ask me about the Latino community and all that, and I really don't have any easy answers to any of the questions they ask me about where the Latino community is going, what's going on, because there's so many changes occurring all the time, and some of them are things that I maybe hadn't anticipated. I'm not sure where it's going. I mean, even the meaning of what it means to be a Latino identity. You know, there are these projections by the Census Bureau that by 2050, Latinos will be 1/3 of the country's population. But then I'm not sure by 2050 what the term Latino is going to mean or how people are going to be identifying, because there's all this mixing. There's certain changes in the way American society is looking at issues of ethnicity and race. I have no idea, like in 20, 30, 40 years, what that discussion is going to be like.
Let's go to the term Latino or Hispanic. Are those terms meaningless? Are they meaningful? Are they clarifying? Are they obfuscating? I mean, to talk about a Latino community, is there a community that's in some ways coherent and monolithic in some senses, or not?
Well, one of the frustrating parts about aspects of talking about the Latino community in this country, in this city, is the tendency by the media and others to try to simplify a complex reality. Latino and Hispanic, these pan-ethnic terms, are meaningful at a certain level of abstraction. There are things that different groups from 21 or so different countries have in common in terms of a common language. There may be some common issues. But at the same time, there are differences between these communities where you have to respect the fact that someone comes from the Cuban experience or comes from a Dominican experience, and that is also that issue of difference within that community, something that you also have to take into account. For example, here in New York City right now, one of the most interesting issues that are coming up are these confounding elections for Congress, right? The Charlie Rangel race. I get calls from, basically journalists who are just like, what the hell's going on? I don't understand what's going on in Harlem. This is Dominican guy is going against this black guy, but the black guy's father's Puerto Rican, and then there are like 3 blacks who are running against the black guy, and then, what the hell's going on in Brooklyn with Nydia Velázquez? She's got like 2 Puerto Ricans running against her, and then some white guy who speaks Chinese, and then, they're having a big fight upstate New York over like some Hasidic summer camps, and that's like a 2-hour drive from New York, and it's going to be reflected in the politics. It's going to have an impact on politics in Brooklyn. Those kind of complexities to me is the joy of talking about politics in New York. But it pains me when these poor journalists are trying to make sense of stuff, and I don't know where they come from. They may be from out of town, but they have problems dealing with it. And sometimes they try to overgeneralize about the Latino experience, or they're dismissive. They use terms like, oh, that's just tribalism or identity politics. Nice to dismiss it, but you can't dismiss it because it's a reality, a day-to-day reality of these communities and of the politics in New York City.
But not only is there a difference, as we'll see both at the national level in this show and then in New York City more specifically in the next one, it's conflict, it's competition between and among these various nationality groups that comprise the Latino population.
But it's not even that's not straightforward. I mean, there are different within the Latino community in New York City. There are different communities that have entered New York City at different stages of development. There's the older Puerto Rican community. There are Dominicans that are more recent, but now making some major inroads politically. There are Mexicans that are just growing like crazy and are just beginning to get into the political system. There are Ecuadorians, there are Venezuelans that are, again, entering the political system in different ways. Some groups are involved in electoral politics, voting. Some of the groups, basically their preferred way of dealing with things because is to make campaign contributions. So there are all these kinds of differences. There were like a zillion Latino Spanish language newspapers. You have New York One News, who 9 years ago created something called New York One Noticias, and they grapple. So you have all of this stuff going on in the city where almost 1 out of every 3 New Yorkers are Latino. Where the majority of the city's population is, people of color. Although sometimes when you look at, the people in power, you can't tell that people of color are the vast majority. You look at when they talk about the Department of Education and school policies, and you look at a lot of the people around that, y'all can't tell that 40%, the largest group of students are Latino, because you hardly see Latinos, in major positions at the Department of Education. So it's a very complex kind of picture. Making sense of it means that you have to accept that complexity and work from there, as opposed to trying to simplify it from the beginning, just to make it easier for you to kind of tell a story.
Well, that's what us professors are involved in, both simplification and complexification.
Right.
So I'm glad you hit both of those. Let's go to the national level. It seems to me that every 4 years, we read and hear about the growing, potentially pivotal impact of Latinos. And, the Latino Wave, the awakening of the electoral giant, you've heard it dozens of times.
My favorite is the Latino tsunami.
Oh, the tsunami. Oh, the tsunami. Oh, well, I mean, better than the wave is a tsunami. Come on. But it hasn't happened, at least not at the presidential level. Why not?
Well, I don't know what it means for it to have happened. I mean, we had also in the 1980s, we were supposed to that was supposed to be the decade of the Hispanic. So you have these pronouncements, and they come out of the fact that demographically, this population's been growing dramatically. We're talking now, if you include Puerto Rico, about more than probably 55 million Latinos in this country, about 16, 17% of the population. And that's been growing in very dramatic ways. And it's having definite impacts. Politically, what's going on is, there was a time when I always tell audiences when I talk about the Latino experience, there was a time 30 years ago or so where we were basically fighting just to get the attention of America. We were trying to tell people, look, we're here. The media should cover our stories. And so with the 2000 census, that's when it really hit the American consciousness that there's this population here that's burgeoning, that's big, and all of a sudden you began to have people like in the corporate sector, political parties say we have to pay attention to this community. First, they actually spend money, so we have to grab as much of that money as possible. They actually, maybe they vote in lower percentages, but there's so many of them that even at that low percentage, they're a significant part of the electorate. So we need to kind of, manipulate that as much as we can in terms of their vote. So all of a sudden you have this growth in market research on Latinos. I mean, I've never seen, and I remember with my good friend Rodolfo de la Garza, who's a professor at Columbia, I remember we were involved, I guess like 30 years ago in a conference down in Austin, Texas, where we pulled together folks to look at the issue of what was happening with the network polling, the opinion polling. Latinos were not even
they weren't even part of the sample.
We put together a volume called Ignored Voices. And we basically were trying to make the case. Now,
it's all over.
There's 2 or 3 times a week, there's a poll that talks about how Latinos plan to vote, what the issues are. And so, we're not having the impact in terms of, that there's a presidential candidate out there that people readily could say, oh, this person will be. But, you have, for example, the impact that someone like a Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida, is in the news. And you have Latinos, Latino players out there. And people are paying attention to this thing called the Latino vote. So, yeah, I think part of the problem is we have the recognition. But at the same time that we got the recognition, there was something nice about being ignored now at the time, because by being ignored, you had a little bit more control over your agenda. Now you have all these forces coming in and having an impact. For example, the Latino Spanish language media, Telemundo, Univision. A lot of people don't realize those are not owned by Latinos.
No.
Telemundo is a part of NBC, was a part of GE. And then you have the major stockholder of Univision is this guy, Savan, who came out with the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. I think that's how, this Egyptian guy, that's how he made his money. He controls Univision.
Different from the blacks, where BET is a black-owned network.
Right, and you saw that kind of discussion in the black community as well. About, I think it was in the last decade, there was also such a discussion about this kind of reminiscing about the good old days when blacks were segregated. And they had their own institutions, and now that's changing, and people are trying to go back to kind of like having a little bit more control over it. Because, well, in the Latino case, that's what's going on now in terms of that community being now trying to be influenced by all these forces outside the community, because they see that there's money in here, votes. There are things that are value in this community which were ignored in the past.
And in a sense, demographically, Latinos are the future.
Well, I mean, that's the case, and that's the tragedy of the whole discussion around immigration reform. And that is, you have a situation right now where you have a system where, look, people are here without papers. They come here. At the same time, they're encouraged by many sectors in this community to come here because they want the cheap labor.
Sure.
So you have this kind of wink kind of come in, and then another sector of the American public is, basically saying, oh, you people are here illegally, you're destroying American culture. So you have this American tug of war over what to do with these immigrants, and then you wind up with these people, all these people, in the middle of this struggle within, American society.
Sure.
Meanwhile, you can easily, if you talk to any serious economist, make the case that, look, one of the things that's going to drive the American future in terms of anything positive is got to be population growth. It's got to be this younger infusion of people into the economy.
You got to expand the gene pool.
And right now that's not even being discussed. What people are getting into is this kind of cultural kinds of criticisms and these kinds of issues. And one of the things that I find interesting also is that America is a relatively new nation. People are used to change in this country. That defines almost the American experience. And now you have a situation where people are trying to basically fight against change, trying to go back to some idyllic past that
doesn't exist, never did.
And so, the Latino community is caught up in this. We become like a political football in the middle of all this. And in the end, Latinos, like you said, in many ways are the future of this country, and that's being obscured.
Okay, let's turn to the 2012 election. If you look at the Republican primaries, it looks like the best thing for President Obama is the Republican Party and Mitt Romney. I mean, are they consciously trying to alienate Latinos? Is that part of the strategy?
Well, what we have to look at now is the whole famous Romney pivot, how he's going to be able to kind of move away from all the toxic discussion. Well, one of the things I remind my friends in the Latino community about is, look, don't get too cocky, because after all, the American public did vote in George Bush. So, let's not...
I've used that one before.
Yeah, let's not, let's understand that, this is not a done deal. As much as it looks like the Republicans were shooting themselves during this primary, there will be some shifting around. There is an economy, an economic insecurity in this country that doesn't benefit Obama. So it's the kind of thing where let's see how Romney kind of shifts and starts changing his message in terms of how he gets his message out to the Latino community. Right now, I suspect that what the Obama administration's successfully done is hired some people to work with the Republicans because the Republicans are basically pushing Latinos at this point in the direction of Obama.
I mean, and the illustrations are legion, and it almost looks like the Republicans have a 2012 neo-Southern strategy where they're pitting Americans, quote unquote, fear of Latinos. And for example, I mean, the Sotomayor vote adds that Romney ran against Santorum and said, well, look, Rick Santorum, voted to confirm this woman who's this activist judge, and she's an icon. And then you've got, he said that he'd veto the DREAM Act. So how does he pivot off of wouldn't the Obama campaign just constantly shove this stuff down his throat? How does he pivot? Can he pivot? Well, does he want to pivot?
Well, I think he does, and I think he will, and I think it'll just be. I'm amazed at how Americans basically fall into kind of like this kind of amnesia about things in a relatively short time. For example, sometimes when you look at the discussion about the 2012 election, you almost kind of forget what happened in 2007, 2008. This country almost went down the toilet. People don't want to talk about that anymore. The Republicans obviously want to obfuscate what happened, and even the Democrats get to the point where they have trouble raising it because people say, well, you're trying to blame someone else for these problems. So that when you have a discussion about this so-called recovery, as weak as it is, people tend to forget or basically minimize the hole that the Obama administration was in at the beginning. And so, to me, that's amazing. That kind of short-sightedness in terms of people forgetting. The same thing with the health system. I remember a few years ago, people were really ticked off at the pharmaceuticals. They were really ticked off at the HMOs. Today, I don't really see that. So, the anger against Wall Street, you see some of it going, but it's all very muted. So that's why I think it's still possible for Romney to pivot and actually put together a message, because I find the American public in general, including many Latinos, will kind of like forget about what happened just a few months earlier.
Okay, but there is discussion among Republicans. I mean, there's, if you will, very simplistically, two views here. One is Latinos aren't worth going after in the first place. They're a small portion of the electorate. They don't vote. They're not registered. They don't turn out. They're not pivotal in any state, perhaps except for Florida. So ignore them, while other Republicans saying you can't win without them. Can Romney win without a certain minimum amount of support from Latinos in 2012? Or is there an electoral college lock for Obama because of the anti-Latino image of the Republican Party?
Well, one of the things about the impact, when you talk about the impact of the Latino vote, a lot of that, the most you could say is the Latino vote is maybe 10, 12% of the total electorate.
Right.
It's going to depend, right, on how close the election is.
Right.
And then it's not even a question of how close it is at the national level, because
States. That's not how we run elections.
And it's an electoral system,
Right.
Electoral college system. So when you look at various states, you look at places like you said, Florida, Colorado, other states. It depends on what happens. So it's like you'll be able to tell if the Latino vote was important in this election after the election's over, not before.
Right.
So right now, that uncertainty is really very helpful, because people are basically projecting this is going to be a close race. It's going to be a rough race. So you can't take anything for granted. So the Republican Party now has an aggressive program to reach out to Latino voters. The Democratic Party as well has to do that, because a lot of Latinos are ticked off at Obama around the deportation.
Well, yeah, I mean,
around a lot of things, so that both parties have to basically cater as much as they can to this community. Of course, it's not the only community that they're catering to.
Sure.
But the attention is there. So the question is, what is the existing Latino leadership doing to capitalize on this?
Well, first of all, is there a Latino leadership?
Well, that's a real problem, because at the national level, what's occurring is that, and I do this with Latino audiences. I say, listen, can you identify a major Latino leader in this country? And usually you can't. We don't have that. And some people say, well, that's besides the point. We have many leaders. But I think you need some people to personify kind of like the movement of a community.
Yep.
And we don't have that. And I think that's a major problem. And it reflects the kind of leadership we have. We have a lot of the leaders of, for example, Latino civil rights organizations, kind of managerial types.
Right.
They're not the old-time organizers, rabble-rousers, advocates.
The Angelo Falcons of the world.
Well, yeah, so you have. I don't know. I don't know if that would be a good thing, but it's a very different style.
Sure.
And you contrast that with in the Black community, where you have the religious sector, you have the Al Sharptons and the Jesse Jacksons and those
and the Floyd Flay. I mean, you have power coming out of the churches.
And in the Black community, that's changing as well.
Absolutely.
But in the Latino community, we never really went through that stage at this level, and that's a problem. And also in the Latino community, I try to point out to people, even when you compare Latinos with Blacks, which a lot of people basically say it's the same minorities and all. Well, this is
that's BS.
It's a different structure.
Totally, of course.
And in the Latino community, there's an overdependence, I argue, with elected officials. We don't have a diversified leadership. We don't have a strong religious leadership that really, like you have in the Black community. Mm-hmm. We don't have a strong business leadership. Even our intellectual class is kind of very kind of weak in many ways in terms of projecting itself, so that we have so we don't have the Cornel Wests, that kind of thing. So that really affects the way we control our agenda, the way we project. This past year, there was this whole discussion about the Pew Hispanic Center came out with the study looking at the issue of how Latinos identify themselves. Right. And it created a whole firestorm of discussion about, is there a Latino identity? As you said, does Latino Hispanic mean anything? Is there any unity within the community? And I'm looking at this discussion, and I'm saying
it's old stuff.
But it's old stuff, but it's also very confusing.
Right.
It's a kind of thing that you didn't see Latino leaders stepping in and kind of setting the record straight.
That's exactly right.
And it was kind of like all over the place.
Right.
And those things.
And Latinos got hit on the interpretation of that. And I think it's the way that Pew sold it. I mean, if you read the Christian Science Monitor editorial and some other statements, I mean, it really came out that Latinos are anti-American. They're refusing to become assimilated. They consider themselves, Colombians invented Venezuelans before they consider themselves American.
And that's interesting.
That's
because,
a big...
Well, the interesting thing is, the Pew Hispanic Center is part of the Pew Charitable Trust.
Right.
They created this thing on their own. They just created, they said, look, here's $5 million. We're creating this thing because we want to do Hispanic stuff.
Right.
They basically, in the process, undermined, I think, a lot of existing Latino research organizations that really came from the community.
By sucking in money and attention.
And attention,
Okay.
because this thing gets a lot of attention. And they've also have what they call a non-advocacy policy. So what happens is the whole idea of objective research, which sometimes works,
right.
sometimes in the case of this identity study, creates a lot of confusion,
right.
which is not ultimately helpful.
We have 1 minute. Mitt Romney calls Angelo Falcon on the phone right after the show and says, Angelo, I need advice. What do I do? Tell me.
Well, just basically next time, don't put the dog on the top of the car. Just,
deal with the dishes?
Have the dog.
When you say next time, when he runs in 2016 after Obama beats him?
Next time he goes on vacation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And what about Obama? Obama calls you up and says, Angelo, I saw your interview with Doug. Tell me what to do. What should he do specifically? Deport fewer people? What?
No, well, I think he's got to make some real concrete commitments behind closed doors to key Latino leaders about exactly what he's going to be doing. And he's got to hope that those key Latino leaders can then convey the seriousness of his commitments to the community. That's it.
Okay. My thanks to Angelo Falcon, president of the National Institute for Latino Policy, for joining us this week. He's coming back next week with Professor Gabriel Hazli Vieira when we'll talk Latinos in New York City specifically, but we'll talk national politics as well. Angelo, we need this other half hour.
Great.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.